Hey, business warriors, Professor E here again with the next series of our VLRs. We're going to start talking about chapter 2 and start getting into a little bit about economics and how it works within the business. Let's get started. When we get started, we start talking about economics. We start talking about what is economics. Some of you out there may have taken some economics courses. If so, maybe you understand this. I usually call this the supply and demand curve. I don't know if your professors ever use that concept, but the idea is that you have supply and you have demand. We start figuring out prices. But the idea is that it's basically the study of how society starts to look at and employs the resources in order to produce the goods and services and the consumption and the things like that that we use within the various groups and the individuals. And if you remember in the last VLR, we talked about those goods and services, those tangible and intangible things that we can touch and not touch that we may want to be able to provide to our customer in order to satisfy a need. We start breaking it down. We look at macroeconomics, the study that concentrates on the operation of the nation's economy as a whole. So we're looking at kind of how are we doing as a whole. I'm going to get into GDP and stuff like that to break it down so that we understand that, hey, this is what we're doing as a society, as a country. The microeconomics, though, starts to concentrate on the behavior of the people and the organizations within the market. So we're breaking it down into each individual business for a better sense of a term, okay? So macros, the broad sense, and the micros breaking it down by each business themselves and how they're doing. I often like to ask the question, though, is which comes first? Does the micro affect the macro, or does the macro affect the micro, right? So it's kind of a trick question. It's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? So the idea is that they really work hand in hand because if there's an effect of a macro event, which we were experiencing now, right, that's going to affect our micro businesses. If something happens within the macro and say the inflation goes up, that's going to affect the micro or something like that. So there are different elements within both that will affect each other. Macroeconomics essentially examines the factors that lead to changes in the main characteristics of the economy. So we're looking at things like inflation. We're looking at the interest rates. We're looking at unemployment, things like that. I'm going to talk briefly about some of those today on this VLR. We do have one in the future where we just talk about the Fed and the interest rates and how they do kind of affect the economy and things like that. So we're going to start to jump into it. Here's a great example of microeconomics. So we're looking from like maybe a person or a business point of view on how people think, right? So here we have Rebecca. She's age 11, right? She has about $20 in her pocket, and the things that she's looking at is she's starting to think about, well, what do I want to spend with my $20, right? So she's thinking maybe I want to buy myself a chocolate bar. I want to buy my little brother a balloon. I'm going to buy a ribbon for my hair. And then she's thinking, I want to donate some of that money. So I'm going to put $5 towards her donation, the wildlife fund. Okay. But if you really think about it, we start to break it down. So here she has $20, right? And these are the 4 things that she wants to contribute to. But what's the prices that are involved, right? So if we say, well, it's only going to cost her $5 for the chocolate bar, right? $5 for a balloon, $5 for a ribbon, and she's definitely going to put $5 towards the donation to the wildlife park, right? The wildlife fund. But I often like to ask you, is there anyone out there that has a little brother? And if so, and things start to change, who usually gets affected? Well, let's imagine if that chocolate bar inflation takes over and it goes to $10, right? Which is really likely. I don't know if you've seen the price of chocolate lately, but it's gone up in value. It's gone up in price a lot. So now she has $25 she has to spend. So she has to make a decision on somebody's going to probably lose in this whole transaction, right? In this case, if you are an older sister and have a little brother, who's probably going to lose? Let's be honest, right? The little brother, okay? So he's not going to get anything, right? You're going to come back and go, oh, hey, buddy, sorry, they ran out of balloons. I'll get you next time, though, right? That's kind of how we think about things, right? Because you're definitely not going to give up the chocolate bar, are you? Heck no, right? You're in it for the chocolate bar, okay? And you still want that ribbon for your hair. Rebecca, she needs this ribbon for her hair. And again, this is kind of a fixed cost because she definitely wants to contribute to the wildlife fund, okay? So usually that's how it works. We have to make decisions in the micro environment to say, okay, if inflation hits us with something, what's going to give? What's going to give? What do we have to give up so that we can maintain and still have the things that we need within the business? Okay, just a breakdown. I always like to do that because the little brother always gets nailed. Examples and ways to increase our resources. Well, we start to look at new energy sources that are out there to increase from technology. Again, we go back to efficiency and effectiveness kind of things. We look at hydroponics. When we start looking at how they're doing foods these days, it's fantastic the way they do this stuff in order to increase the productivity faster, more efficient. One of my favorites is nanotechnology. We have a lot of things going on right now with nanotechnology. I used to work on a thing called the Future Force Warrior program many years ago, where they were looking at, I think it was MIT had this technology where it was nanotechnology or small microchips inside the battle dress uniform, the camouflage uniform you see the soldiers out there in. And the idea was that in order to take away the Kevlar, all that heavy equipment that they wear to protect themselves from being shot, the idea was that they could remove all that because there was nanotechnology or microchips within the woven fabric, so that if a bullet or something coming at them, it would read that heat that was coming towards them at that one position on their body, and that part of the nanotechnology would solidify and harden like a Kevlar. So the idea is that it wouldn't penetrate and cause a wound. It may knock you on your butt, but the idea is that the technology is out there for us to do stuff like that. But what's the problem? Well, the idea was that it's there, but it might cost us $100,000 per soldier in order to equip them with that type of technology. But as you understand the process and how technology gets better, right, with all of these different types of solutions, as the technology gets better, the price starts to go down. So maybe we see that 25, 30 years from now. It would be crazy if we did. But again, we have all of the different resources that are starting to happen that increase and help us being more productive, more efficient, and so we can increase our profits and decrease our expenses. We start talking about the green revolution, right? So I often joke, who hugged their tree today? Who loves the environment? Who's green out there? But you know what? It's a public concern. Global warming is out there that has led to the success of the Toyota Prius, right? The Prius is out there. It's trying to have higher gas mileage with low carbon emissions and stuff like that, and people buy that. That's the target market for them. Okay. Farmers are growing more corn and crops to use as biofuels. That's huge right now, right? And what else can you think that might help lower the carbon emissions? There are so many things out there right now that they're trying to do to kind of, save the planet, to combat against global warming and things like that. But the green movement is big. We get into we start shifting gears here and start talking about Adam Smith and the father of economics. He believed in that, if you're following economics and stuff like that, but he believed that freedom was vital to the economic survival. Which is kind of leading into how the United States operates, right? He said you have freedom to own land, which is great. High five, right? You can own property. You have the right to keep the profits of your business. Who likes that idea, right? I do. Okay. And he said people will work hard if they believe they will be rewarded, obviously. It leads us into then what we call the invisible hand theory, right? So the idea behind it is, as people improve their own situation in life, it'll help improve the economy. The economy will prosper, okay? So the idea is that when self-direct gain leads to social and economic benefits for the whole economy, the whole community. So the idea, I kind of mentioned it in the previous VLR when we're looking at the overview of the whole business course, but the invisible hand theory will be that if I have productivity within my business, then maybe I can hire somebody on, I can pay them, which will in turn help them with their own goals and stuff within the community, and they'll help me make more productivity within the business. So it's kind of a win-win. If I can leverage their time and energy and abilities to increase our productivity, I may make more money then. I can hire somebody else. So you can see how this kind of works within the economy, and that as I get better, I can pay somebody else, makes their lives better, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how the invisible hand theory works. And here we have just an example. We talk about the farmer. He earns money selling his crops, right? In order to make more money, he decides that he wants to hire more farmhands. And again, he gets more energy, more productivity out of other people. But in turn, when he produces more, there's plenty of food for the community. He's also paying those people so they can then go out there and build their own homes or do whatever they want and have their own lives as well. Okay, so the farmer helps the employees, he helps the community, and he's also helping himself. So that's kind of the idea behind it. Corruption, we started talking about corruption, destroys economies. In many countries, a business person must bribe the government to gain permission to own land or maybe build or conduct business operations, right? Imagine you're a restaurant owner, right, in need of a liquor license, okay? But you've been unable to get one. You know people in the government. Would you be tempted to make a large contribution to the re-election campaign of, say, a president's campaign, okay, and to receive that license, right? In some countries, this is how it works, right? Not here though, right? It doesn't work like that here, okay? Hopefully not, right? But it's funny because when I do teach this on campus or in class, I get a lot of head nods from a lot of students who may have, come from other countries, and they're kind of going, it's kind of the way of business. So we do discuss that, but, way of the world. Leads us into starting to break it down. We have capitalism, right? All or most of the land, factories, and stores are owned by individuals, not the government, okay? And they're operated for money, for a profit. Who likes that idea? High five. Absolutely. This is where I put my God bless America stamp on it, right? Capitalism. This is kind of what we do here in the U.S. United States, England, Australia, Canada are probably the top ones that really work in a capitalist society, okay? Capitalism has the 4 basic rights we break down. You have the right to own private property. Who likes that idea, right? You have the right to own a business and, again, keep all the business profits. Again, who likes that idea, right? You have the right to freedom of competition, which we're going to talk about. And you have the right to freedom of choice, right? So that's where we start to go into that satisfy a need, pricing strategies, and things like that, because we want to, consumers have that freedom of choice. Leads us into this guy. Hopefully you know who this guy is, but it's Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, President FDR. He came up with some additional rights saying, hey, freedom of speech and expression. We have the freedom to worship as we want. Freedom from want and freedom from fear, because he came up with the quote that says the only thing we have to fear, and hopefully you know it, but it's fear itself. Right, exactly. Leads us into some more terms. We get into what we call the free market. So we have capitalist society, leads us into the free market, which allows us to have the decisions about what and how much to produce. It's made by the market. The market will dictate what can be produced and at what price. Okay, so we start to get into it a little bit on supply and demand and things like that. Consumers send signals what they like and how they like it, right? And it leads us into price. Again, I mentioned that. Tells the companies how much a product should produce, right? If something is wanted but hard to get, demand goes up, right? The price will rise. That just kind of makes sense until more products are available, right? So, we start talking about, here's another example. A seller may want to sell, say, t-shirts, for example, right? For $50, right? So who's gonna buy that? But only a few people may want to buy at that price, right? If the seller lowers the price, more people will be intrigued to buy that product, buy that t-shirt, right? So here we have t-shirts right here, My Professor, right? So I have a My Professor. You can go buy all kinds of apparel there. You can buy t-shirts and sweatshirts and stuff like that. But if I'm not pricing it correctly or making it attractive, you're probably not going to be in. The demand is going to be low, okay? So you can go check that out and see what the pricing is on that kind of stuff, right? If I establish the correct price, we hit that equilibrium, then I'm going to sell an abundance of different shirts and stuff like that. That's the idea behind it, right? Again, I'm a visual person, so if you start thinking about it here we have the supply curve. So as a supplier, you're only willing to sell maybe 5 shirts at $5 because there's not much profit there, right? What's the cost of me making these shirts, right? I have to make sure I make a profit. That's the idea, okay? We come in here I'm willing to sell 50 shirts at $50, right? I'll sell 1,000 shirts at $50 if you're willing to pay for it, but you're probably not, okay? So you can see how the supply curve starts to integrate into how many shirts that we can sell, right? Leads us into demand, right? So you saw the supply curve going this way, okay? Now we're going to see the demand. So what's going on here? Well, willing to buy as many as possible. So if I sold My Professor t-shirts at, say, $5, I'd probably sell a ton of them. Wouldn't make $1 off of it because it probably cost me more to make those shirts, right? But in theory, I could sell a ton of them, okay? But the idea is that if I put it up to $50, remember the supply, the supplier is willing to sell tons at $50, but the demand says, it's probably a little bit too expensive, right? I can get a different type of t-shirt somewhere else or whatever I want to do, whatever the competition's doing. So here I sell as many as possible, not willing to buy at this price, okay? So we put them together. This is where remember I said this in the beginning, supply and demand, right? So we look at how much the supplier is willing and what price is willing to sell, what is demand willing to do, and we find a nice equilibrium point. And in this example, it was around $15 where you're going to sell quite a few shirts. You're going to continue to sell at this nice price. That's the idea. Where could we find the sweet spot or equilibrium price for our product, okay? And it's going to be based on a couple things. I'm going to get into it in future VLRs, but the idea is it's based on cost, right? What does it cost me to make? What's my markup going to be from there, right? And then it's going to be based on what's the competition selling at, right? So I can sell at $50, but if the competition's selling at $30, I'm not going to be in business, right? Got to satisfy a need. So I may have to lower that price to be somewhere in the competitive marketplace with the same product line, okay? So we try to figure it out. And the third one's demand, right? The third one's demand. So if, current situation we're in right now, go look at Purell. How much did Purell go up in price, right? A lot, because there's a lot of demand. They were off the shelves. They couldn't fill the shelves fast enough. Therefore, demand of Purell, the sanitizer, went way up. It's a great example of this, okay? So the three types are cost, competition, and demand. That's what's going to affect your price generally. Leads us into competitive advantages. Okay, forms of competitive advantage. There's really two types I want you to understand here. Okay, you have the absolute advantage, and that's when a country can produce something that is cheaper or of a higher quality than any other country, right? An advantage based on possessing a scarce resource, such as oil. Oil is a great example because in the Middle East, it usually has an abundance of oil. It's an interesting concept right now, what's going on with oil, because the price is down a lot because their barrels are going up or they're supplying a lot of barrels, there's less demand, so it's causing the price to go down. So you kind of see how supply and demand is working right now. But they do kind of have an absolute advantage. I would say that's starting to become more of a comparative advantage because with the United States, when a country can produce goods more efficiently or better, right, than other countries, then can produce the same goods. So you could say here we have an example where technology advancements. The U.S. is very good at technology advancements. So we have a comparative advantage over other countries, whereas the absolute advantage of oil, for the most part, the Middle East has an absolute advantage of oil other countries. With our technology advancements, though, we're starting to become, they used to have an absolute advantage over us, but we're starting to have more of a comparative advantage with oil because we are starting to make our own oil. We have our own resources to generate oil, okay? That's one way of looking at it. Another way to look at it is, I often kind of bring it down to a lower level, is that, if two people are going for a job of instance, right, and we look at their experience levels and what they have for capabilities, if the job position was for a management position and I was going for it and say up against a student out there that only had 6 months of experience in management and I have 20 years, who has the absolute advantage? Well, probably me, because they're going to look at somebody with a lot of experience and go, okay, this is the guy we want. But then if they they add a requirement and they're saying, well, we want them to speak Spanish, right? And this student over here has a Spanish speaking ability, but less experience. And I have a lot of experience, but I don't know how to, I'm un pequeño. I don't speak a lot of Spanish, okay? They may have a comparative advantage over me, right? They may look at that and go, well, we really need the Spanish speaking, so do we want to train Professor E in how to speak Spanish? Maybe, I don't know, worth the cost? I don't know, maybe I don't want to do it, we'll see. Or do we want to just train that person up in their management skills and maybe we can pay them less so we can save a little bit of money? So they have to think about that. So absolute advantage would be I have the skill sets and the experience over them. I can dominate them because I have all this experience. Comparative advantage, if they add that requirement, it would be like Spanish speaking, for instance. So that's another way to kind of look at it. I like for you to look at it from the country point of view, but the other way to think about it would be from that example I just gave you with the student and myself under a management position we're looking at. Okay, so I'm going to ask this kind of stuff on the exam, so I really want you to kind of review this and understand this one. This is a really good one to understand. Leads us into the 4 types of competition. So we're going to break them down between the perfect, monopoly, oligopoly, and monopolistic. Okay, so let's take a look at it. The first one is monopoly. So when I say a monopoly, what's the first thing you think of? Hopefully it's the game board, right? Who's ever played the game Monopoly, right? So you have, go straight to jail. You have, $200 every time you pass around. You get $200. Here we have, Park Lane. We have Boardwalk. Reading Railroad. All those good things, right? So hopefully you understand the game of Monopoly. The idea is that in the game you're trying to dominate and own all of these things. So when somebody lands on your property, they have to pay you. Okay, so now you understand the game of it. Okay, so let's just go back to how it works with competition, right? Within a monopoly, there's usually only one person in town. There's only one game in town, only one business in town. So they control all the price. Okay. A great example they use here would be utilities. So in our area, what's the one utility that may be a dominant or a monopoly? Well, probably our lights, right? Where do you get it? Dominion Energy. That's mostly where everybody has to get their power from. So they do have a monopoly in the area. Okay. The second one would be called an oligopoly, right? So that means that their dominant space, there's only a few competitors within that space, and it's pretty difficult to break into that space. A great example would be automobile manufacturers, right? Ford, Chevy, Nissan, Toyota's in there, Honda's in there. A great example would be Kia. Kia has only been around in the United States for maybe 20 years now, a little less possibly. And if you knew anything about Kia when they first came in, their cars were horrible. They were low grade, cheap looking, cheap manufacturing, the whole 9 yards. But they have grown into a more luxurious type of car with they're being sponsored by the NBA. You'll see celebrities like LeBron who'll be driving a Kia. So they've gone into a different market by increasing the quality of their car. So now they can compete into the luxurious market. But it took them some time. It's a very difficult market to break into. So that's what oligopoly means. There are a few competitors. There are some barriers to get in, and so on and so forth. Monopolistic, there are many out there. So it almost looks like there's pure competition, which means there's all kinds of the same in the same industry, and it's pure competition. That's great. That means that we're competing on price, so you can choose whoever you want. Monopolistic, kind of the same thing. There are many out there. However, one usually stands out above the rest. So they have market dominance. Okay, so they have a monopolistic type of view with the rest of the competition. Okay, so there's a lot, but there's one that kind of sticks out. And there's few barriers. You can enter that market. It might be kind of tough because there's a lot of people in there. Okay, but the real thing is that the reason they have a monopolistic, not a monopoly, but monopolistic, is because of the product differentiator. Okay, so what's a good one? Well, they use Levi jeans here. So maybe jeans in this market, they're the best jeans in the market. Everyone loves these jeans. They gain the most market share. Maybe they own 85% of the market. That's monopolistic. I often joke and say, everyone out there is an iPhone, Apple fan, and I'm not. I'm a Samsung guy. So, cause I would say you guys buy into the Kool-Aid and you drink the Kool-Aid and all that stuff, and you always have your iPhone. I'll defend. I love my Apple, right? The idea that I would tell you that Apple is kind of monopolistic in a sense, though. It's not that their product's better, because I don't think it is. I think Samsung dominates as far as product goes. We can argue that all day, right? However, I would cross this off and say market differentiator. They have wonderful marketing, Apple does. That's how they draw you in. That's why I say you drink the Kool-Aid. You see it. They almost have a marketing campaign that says, if you don't get it, then you just don't get it. Yeah, if you're not in the cool, you're not cool. And you buy into that going, I need to be cool. So their marketing differentiates them within the market to give them a higher share within the market. Now, I will argue that Samsung, Microsoft, and them, if you watch some of their marketing, they're kind of copycatting Apple and they're stealing market share by doing it. So product differentiator is usually the reason why that one organization or one product is the dominant within that market, and it gives them that monopolistic type of viewpoint. Okay, so you have a monopoly, one game in town, the only ones there. Okay, it's very difficult to break in. How can you start your own energy company and provide electricity? You can't. Okay, only Dominion can in this area. Okay, so very difficult to do. Oligopoly, you could try to break into it. It's kind of tough. Okay, so there's very few. Okay, some barriers. Monopolistic, everyone's in there, but there's one that stands out. That's the idea behind it. So, and it's usually done by product differentiation. Okay, And then pure competition, everybody's there, it's unlimited, there are no barriers to entry. You're just going to have to be based on price. Who's going to have the best price? It's going to be, everyone has similar prices, similar products. You just make a decision as a consumer, okay? And again, you have some great examples right here. So make sure you study this. You will see this one again. We break into the free market benefits and limitations, okay? So we start looking at some of the benefits of the free market where it allows for open competition, just like I talked about with the pure competition. So we have pure competition, we have open competition. We want to have free markets, right? We want to have competition because it's good for consumers, right? Provides the opportunity for poor people to work out of poverty. That's the beauty of our country, right? The idea is that, hey, you can come from nowhere and become something here, okay? And then there are some limitations where people may start to, let greed drive them a little bit. Now, imagine that, right? But it happens everywhere, right? So some limitations where we have greed. We start breaking it down. We're looking at socialism. Okay, so what is socialism? We start looking at the benefits of socialism. Okay, does it work? That's the question, because socialism is the idea behind, everybody should have everything, right? We say that the rich, should not be rich and everybody should be equal across the board. So it's a big argument right now when we start talking about socialism. We start talking about free education, free healthcare. Everybody should have free healthcare, right? Free childcare, longer vacations, right? Shorter work weeks. Basically, we shouldn't do anything, right? That's the idea behind some argue with socialism, right? Does it work? I often say, I don't know, right? So we say socialism, if we can't all be rich, then let's all be equally poor. That's kind of the argument behind that. Here you go, is a good example. Here is the United States. I think they say this is in Massachusetts. This is our economy, filled shelves. This is socialism. This is Venezuela, actually. This is the picture in Venezuela, if you know anything about Venezuela right now, okay? It's dead, nothing there, okay? Here's Venezuela, okay? On the brink of collapse. They're fighting over there, okay, because of the socialism, okay? More Venezuela. More Venezuela. Does it work? And here's their flag, which I find interesting because if you just add a couple things to their flag, it makes you wonder if socialism really does work. It's a sad face. Okay, I don't think it works. Okay, so many people argue it does. Many people argue it does not. I think there's a fine line. You have to think about that. Can it work? Maybe in some instances, but not overall, right? The negatives of socialism. Where are we getting at? Well, we start looking at the one is the brain drain, right? So, if you were sitting here and saying, well, Professor E, I think it's a wonderful concept. What if I said, well, let's run the course this way. We'll run the business course this way. So when you take an exam and it's worth 200 points, right? And you work really hard on that exam and you get 200 points, but there's another student who didn't do a darn thing, right? They just took the exam and let's say they get a C on the exam. Let's say they get a 140 out of 200, that's a C, right? Well, then I'm going to take 20 points from your 200 that you earned, and I'm going to knock you down to a 180. Now you're at a low A, but I'm going to give that 20 points to that 140 and bump them up to a 160. So now they're in the B range. Okay. And then I'm actually going to take another 20 points from you, and I'm going to knock that 180 down to a 160, and I'm going to give it to another student who had a 140. So everybody's at about a 160, and we all get a B. How would that make you feel, right? Well, for the person who had a 140 and got bumped up to a B, they think it's high five, right? That's the idea, right? But then for the person who worked their butt off and did really well, got all the terms, knocked everything out, and got a 200 out of 200, they're upset because that's the idea. They worked so hard. That's the brain drain idea, right? You have some of the country's best and brightest workers, doctors, lawyers, people who worked really hard to get to that spot in life, and all of a sudden they have to be equally across the board, right? They may do what? They may leave the country and go find somewhere else to go. Just like you may leave my course, my class to say, I can't do this, I need my A, and go somewhere else that doesn't do that so you can earn your grade that you deserve. Does that make sense? So you have to be careful about socialism. There are fewer inventions, fewer innovations. Why? There's no sense in it, right? I'm not motivated to be better because if I do invent something, I got to give it to everybody else. So that's the idea behind the brain drain, the negatives of socialism. Let's talk about communism. Oh my gosh. Well, gosh, we talk about socialism. Let's get into communism, right? An economic and political system in which the government makes almost all economic decisions and owns almost all the major factors of production. They make all decisions. You have nothing, okay? They do it all for you. Prices don't reflect demand. They don't care. Doesn't matter, okay? Leads to shortage of items. right? We talked about supply and demand. It doesn't even work, okay? Shortage of items, including food. There could be long lines you waiting for food with communism, okay? Most communist countries today suffer severe economic depression and citizens fear the government, okay? So here we go. How's it work? YouTube here? Yeah, it's our tube over in a communist regime, okay? Or better yet, you Kool-Aid drinkers, we call it an iPhone. They call it a Wii phone because everybody's going to be controlled by the government, okay? Other economic systems, we get into the free market economy. We start looking at the market largely determines what goods and services are produced, right? Who gets them and how the economy grows, okay? Free market economies seem to kind of work because the market, the demand, the consumers kind of help determine what goods and services are good. Remember I said, if you can't satisfy a need, you're out of business, okay? This is where we lead into the free market economy, okay? Command economies, the government largely determines what goods and services are produced, who gets them, and how the economy will grow, okay? So free market, the market, the consumers just kind of decide. That's kind of what we want, right? Command, the government decides everything, all right? And it leads us into a mixed economy, okay, where some allocations of resources are made by the market, they determine it, and some are made by the government. That's kind of what we want to lead to, right? Some things we probably need the government to kind of help us with, but overall, we kind of want to have that free market idea where we have the market, the consumer, the demand kind of determine what will be produced and what will be offered, all right? Neither free market nor command economies have created sound economic conditions. So the mix of the two has really kind of been the way of the world in order to be successful. Communist governments are starting to disappear. That's a good thing, right? Mostly social governments are cutting back on social programs, lowering taxes, because if you're going to have a social program, you have to raise everybody's taxes to pay for everything. Nobody likes that. Okay, they're starting to figure out that, hey, lower taxes may be a better deal for people. So lowering taxes and moving towards capitalism. That's great, right? What's even better is some capitalist countries are increasing social programs. We are, as the United States, is one of them, okay? And moving towards socialism. We don't want to be entirely socialist. We don't necessarily have to be entirely capitalist, right? We kind of work in somewhere in the give and take of this, okay? Leads us into some macro things that we want to discuss, right? We talked about macroeconomics, microeconomics, things like that. One of the big ones is the gross domestic product, or the GDP, right? So the total value of final goods and services that are produced in a country, okay, in a given year. Normally, it says in a given amount of time, but it's usually a given year, okay? As long as the company is within the country's border, all right? So the idea is basically the GDP is basically the revenues that a country generates within a year, okay? How much money comes in. So we want to keep track of that. That's very important, okay? Because the GDP kind of runs and tells you how much growth opportunity there is within that country, okay? When the GDP changes, businesses feel the effect. If it goes up, we're doing well. If it goes down, that means we're not doing too well, okay? The U.S. high GDP is at about 21 trillion right now, just of last year, okay? The GDP is what enables us to enjoy the high standards of living that we have in this country, okay? Looking at a couple of facts here and looking at a couple of statistics, this is interesting, okay? So we have in the 90s, 2000, 2007, we were at about 14 trillion, okay? 2015, we went to 17 trillion. 2019, we're at about 21 trillion, just like I showed you in the previous slide, okay? This is interesting, playing catch up, okay? So we have China here in 2008. In 2008, we were at about $13.9 trillion, okay? Look what happened here, though. In 2012, we went up to 15.2 trillion, but look what happened to China. They almost doubled in 5 years. From 2008 to 2012, almost 5 years, okay? They almost doubled their GDP. Versus us, we just had a normal couple percentage points from there, okay? That's not good. That's not good. That's the idea behind is why is their GDP doubling? Well, first of all, they want our life, right? They want the ability to have the standard of living that we have, okay? By doing that, what are they going to need as far as resources to increase their GDP? Oil. So if everything's affected by oil, they're going to start drawing on different resources to generate and have that kind of higher cost of living for themselves, okay? That's going to put, a damper or going to put a squeeze on the rest of the world if they want that kind of stuff. So think about that, right? We look at 2016, we went from, 4 years later, we're still growing a little bit. Let's see what China did. They went to 9.2. So they slowed down in their GDP growth a little bit. Okay. Here they almost doubled in 2008 to 2012, and then they finally slowed them down a little bit. Okay. Looking at last year, we are continuing to grow, and again, so is China. But again, if you look at percentages, they didn't double. Okay, they're slowing it down a little bit, and we're doing pretty well now. You can see as we start to increase our GDP, so that's good. Our GDP has gone up, and our increase in GDP has gone up, so that's good. Okay. Leads us into some more terms. We start looking at unemployment. Okay, have you heard about unemployment? Because that's a big headliner these days, right? Unemployment is the percentage of civilians at least 16 years old, okay, who are unemployed and tried to find a job within the prior 4 weeks. Okay, so again, we're seeing a lot of this in the headlines right now. What's going on around us? Everybody got laid off, so they're looking at unemployment, right? Everybody has to try to collect unemployment to try to kind of survive right now until they get a job once again. Okay. Different types. We have frictional, structural, cyclical, seasonal. I would say ours is probably frictional right now. There's a high friction going on. Okay. Little chart here. We have 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Unemployment started going up in 2008 and 9. Pretty interesting. Let's see. 2013 started going back down. 14 went down. Then we have 15, 16, 17. So we have a changeover here, and we start to go, unemployment starts to go way down. And of course, what are we seeing now? Boom, 2020, right? With everything that's going on with the pandemic and the virus and all that stuff, boom. I think we're at 30 million unemployed now or something like that. So you can see a major spike in unemployment, which is not good. Leads us into some other terms. We start talking about inflation. So what is that? The increase in prices, right? General rise in prices of goods and services over time. I'm sure you've seen the effect of inflation just in your general lives, right? Probably the biggest one is sometimes we see in gas. We've seen gas prices go all the way up to $4.50, $5.50 a gallon. And that's when you're out there shaking the hose, trying to get every last drop out of that gas tank, right? Get into the gas tank. And then we've seen it come back down. Okay, so inflation has caused it to go up, and then we see it come back down. Disinflation, when the prices increase, are slowly an inflation rate declining. Okay, so disinflation comes back down a little bit. Deflation, prices are declining because too few dollars are chasing too many goods. Again, supply and demand, right? So too few dollars are chasing too many goods, so we have a deflation. That's not the greatest thing. And then stagflation is even worse, right? The economy is slowing, but prices are going up. So we have a slow economy, but everything's increasing. That's not cool, right? So, and then finally, hyperinflation. Where do you think we've seen that before? Well, we just recently seen that, right? If you went out there and try to buy a thing of Purell, go find out and see how much it costs you to buy a bottle of Purell. It's craziness right now, okay? Because again, supply and demand. There is a high demand for Purell, and there's only so much supply. So if there's limited amount of supply and a high demand, what's the one variable that's going to change? Price. And it can happen overnight, which is pretty much what happened right there. Overnight, you see the price of Purell. It's like waking up tomorrow and the price of milk is $15 a gallon. You go to the store and it's $15 a gallon. You're like, what the heck happened, right? That's hyperinflation. Okay, so we talk about that. Leads us into the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, where the monthly statistic that measures the pace of inflation. I think Michigan comes out with it. University of Michigan comes out with the CPI index every second Tuesday of the month. The government computes the cost of goods and services, okay, housing, food, apparel, medical, all those expenses that we have within the country, right, to see if they're going up and down. That's what we're looking at. Are we seeing inflation start to happen? They want to keep track of that because, again, a previous slide, we don't want hyperinflation. We don't want stagflation. We don't want things to just start to churn, the economy's slowing down and everything's going up. We've got to make sure they keep track of that kind of stuff. We look at the wages. You look at the rent, the leases, the tax brackets, all that stuff, and the interest rates, which I'm going to talk about later on in another VLR with the Fed and interest rates and how some citizens are based upon the CPI. So we're looking at this index to see if we have inflation happening. Leads us into productivity. Again, I've mentioned productivity with efficiency and being effective and stuff like that. How much productivity are we generating? We want to manage that, and we want to keep track of that within our country as well. Productivity in the service sector grows slowly because of less new technologies. Kind of makes sense. And I think I've mentioned in the previous VLR that, the US is around 70, 80% mostly services. So again, as the technology increases, so can our efficiency and our effectiveness. Our productivity can go up. So it really is kind of tech dependent a little bit. Productivity in the U.S. has risen due to technology advancements, as we have already discussed, and it's just going to continue to go, right? We've seen since the 90s just an exponential chart of technology and how it's helped us out. Leads us into the business cycle, periodic rises and falls in our economy. So we have the boom, the recessions, the depressions, and the recovery. So let's talk about it a little bit. So here we have, if you're looking at a basic chart from, this is the early 90s all the way up through mid 2000s right now, 2006. This right here would probably be called what? Well, we would probably look at that as a depression, okay? That would be the idea behind it. We never say the D word though, okay? It's never called a depression, especially around here with the media and stuff. We call it the Great Recessions is what we call it, okay? So, but yes, this is a depression by term, okay? And that would mean that, what is this then? This little arrow going up probably. We're looking at recovery because we're coming out of the depression, we're recovering. Here we probably have what? What do you think that is? Probably prosperity, okay? Because we're hitting a peak. We've got some peaks. And then what's this going down? That's our recessionary period, okay? So just the basic idea of kind of where we are in the markets, how our economic cycle works, okay? I added in 2007. And then if you know anything about 2008, that was a fun year because everything dropped almost 50%, okay? So it dropped down in 2008. 2009, it started to what? Prosper, started to recover. Here we're recovering, still recovering. 2013 to 2019, we started to hit prosperity. Our markets were doing well last year, last few years actually. The economy's been rocking and rolling. And then, of course, the situation we're in right now, 2020, how's this going to work out at the end of the year? It's going to be very interesting, right? So we may start to see a turn, and then that means we're starting to go into a what? Probably a recessionary period. That's the idea. We start hitting into a recessionary period, but we'll see. Leads us into some more terms. We get into the national deficit, where the amount of money the federal government spends beyond what it gathers in taxes. Remember, taxes are good. Remember I showed you in the previous VLR all the tax money that we give for our schools and our hospitals and our fire departments and things like that, right? It's the money that comes in that the government uses to pay for things, right? And we hope that those elected government officials do the right thing with that money, okay? So the amount of money that the federal government spends beyond what it gathers in taxes. So we're spending more money than what we gather. We have a national deficit, right? Leads us into the national debt, right? The sum of the government deficit over time. I don't even tell you what a surplus is because I don't think we ever had one. I think we had a surplus in the mid 90s for like 30 seconds or something like that, and then it went away. Okay, but when the government takes in more than it spends, that'd be fantastic, right? But we're not there yet. Okay, we're mostly the sum, the deficit over time. Okay, and our debt keeps going up. And matter of fact, I think we're at about $25 trillion right now or something like that. I'm going to show you in a second, actually. Okay, but the idea is that we keep spending instead of taking in more money. Now, we're always trying to figure that out and try to reduce that and try to slow it down. That's the key. If we can slow it down and then maybe start to reduce it and get it going the other way, that'd be fantastic. But again, Congress always comes back and they keep raising the debt level. The national debt's kind of like having a credit card. If you ever watch, there have been times where we've had government shutdowns. That's because the debt had reached its maximum that Congress had approved, and therefore we were going over it. So in order to stop and come up with a new, increase our debt level or increase our credit card level, that's kind of what we're doing, right? Congress has to go in and reapprove it again, okay? So what happens? We have government shutdowns until that happens because we have to slow down the amount of spending that we're doing. And you see people go home for a few days until Congress comes out and says, we raised the debt limit and now we're back to business, okay? Leads us into our final slide here where we get into the national debt has reached over, 25 trillion, and that's just recently, March of 2020, okay? In 16 trillion in 2013. So in 4 years, since 2009 up to 2013, it rose 45%. It rose 45%. That's crazy. This is a lot of spending that we did in those years, okay? And then just to put it in perspective, here's if you stacked $1 bills, okay? The national debt would equal over 750,000 miles right on top of each other. you'd have 750,000 miles, okay? And the moon's only half that distance, not even, 238,000 miles away. So you can go to the moon and back, okay? And then finally here, I like to show this to everybody, but if you get a chance, go to usdebtclock.org, usdebtclock.org. I just want to show this to you for a second. This is pretty cool. So what you see here is there's our national debt right here, okay? $25 trillion, and it just keeps rolling, right? This is by the second, because this is how much money we're spending right now, okay? And this is how fast we're spending it, okay? This is pretty interesting. It says debt per citizen. So if everybody could write a check for $76,477, we could get out of debt, okay? So just break out your checkbook and go ahead and send it in, and I'm sure they'll do the right thing with that money, okay? Debt per taxpayer, okay? That's per citizen. So that would be like even the 4-year-olds out there would have $76,000, right? But the taxpayers, if you could write a check for $202,000, we could get out of debt. So again, just cut a check to I'm sure they'll do really well with that money for us. They'll take care of it, right? Here's our tax revenue coming in, U.S. federal tax revenue. So it's always moving. This is great, guys. If you get a chance to go to this, it's really good. Look, here's our GDP at around 21 trillion. Just keeps going up, so we're doing good. This is all the money we're collecting into the country. Again, tariffs. We talk about tariffs and the tariffs that's going on with President Trump and things like that. This is some of that money that's coming in there. We'll talk more about that down the road. And the one thing I did want to show you is right here. This is interesting because this is pretty accurate as of today, but the official unemployment is at 38 million people based on what's going on today. And the actual number is 40 million people. So when we say that the unemployment rate went up to over 20%, and it was at what, 2 or 3%, everybody's unemployed right now. It's just craziness, okay? So if you get a chance to go check this out and look at this official unemployment, it's amazing. 38 million people are unemployed right now. Payroll tax revenue, income tax revenue, this is just cool. If you get a chance to go check it out, I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. It's really neat to watch. And that is it. We've now covered our second VLR, okay? And I'll see you on the next VLR coming up here soon.